Good evening. You're very welcome to the fourth instalment of the spring webinar series for myself and my colleagues here in Teagasc, Sligo, Leitrim, Donegal. My name is Cian Condon. I'm a dry stock advisor based in the Manor Hamilton office, and I'll be your host here this evening. Tonight, as the days get longer, we move into March, the focus moves towards the grazing season. And I'm joined by Martin McCullough from the Carndonagh office, who will be covering soil fertility. And then Fergus O'Rourke of the Manor Hamilton office will be covering grassland management. Now, obviously, we can't meet face to face at the moment, but we still want to keep things as interactive as possible. And with that in mind, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a question and answer function. And please feel free to send in your questions and comments right throughout this evening's session, and I will put them to our panel before the end. So without any further ado, I'll call on Martin firstly to put on your screen, Martin. Yeah, and if you want to just test that we can hear you okay there.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's perfect, Martin. And do you want to try sharing your screen, or will we move straight ahead? I can give just if you want to just try it, and we'll see.
Right. Good evening, everybody. Right, you're very welcome. Look, I'm just going to talk to you about soil fertility. All right, and it'll lead into what Fergus is going to talk about later, which is grassland management. This is more of a long-term project, but look, it's very important nonetheless. All right. So what I want to talk about tonight is good soil fertility. It's good for your farm business. It grows your grass, it grows your crops, it'll save you money, it improves the environment, it'll protect water quality. It's a win-win situation. There's no negatives at all about having good soil fertility. I'm not going to drone on about department regulations as to why you should this, or you have to this, or you have to the other. Tonight, I'm just going to talk about, why you should have good soil fertility. There's a good thing. It's a good thing to have, a good thing to do, not something you have to do. All right. I will mention a couple of regulations at the end just to keep you updated, but I'm not going to dwell on them tonight. Right. So look, what I'm going to talk about, just basic outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about what is soil fertility. All right. A lot of people you hear these words thrown about, and just to explain basically what it is. Basically, we're talking about what happens in the top, maybe 4 inches, top centimeters, 10 centimeters of soil here. The fertility is there that grows your grass, grows your crops. Then just what you can do to improve it, and then some take-home messages. And throughout the talk, I'm just going to talk about, point out, the benefits of having good soil fertility. That it is worth the bother and the time that you take to try and improve your soil fertility. So look, basically soil fertility, what we're talking about is the things we can measure easily in the soil. It's the level of acidity in the soil, which is the pH level. So, all right, pH is anything below 7 is acidic, anything above 7 is alkaline. The vast majority of our soils are acidic. And once the pH range is between 6 and 7, we can grow most crops in Ireland, or most grass, or our potatoes, or anything. Once it gets below 6 or above 7, that's when nutrients get locked up in the soil, and that causes issues. You can just see an example here from the photo. This is a clover plant that's grown in a very acidic soil, which is 5.5, compared to the same plant which is grown in a pH of 6.3. You can just see there's massive, difference in the root development and the plant growth in between the two. Look, that's the same. That's clover, but it's the same for grass. It's the same for crops. Look, the main nutrients in soil would be N, P, and K, would be nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Look, nitrogen is far more mobile and taken up by the plant, so it's harder to measure. There's not as much of it in the soil, stored in the soil, whereas P and K is basically stored in the soil, so it's readily identifiable, and we can get accurate readings of the levels of it in the soil from soil tests. So what does P and K do? Like P, right, is potassium, and P is phosphorus, and K is potassium or potash. All right. P is very important for plants. You can just see on the left here, it's very important for the roots to grow, and it's an energy source for the plant to grow. And on the right then, that's potassium, which is very important, or potassium or potash, which is very important to uptake water and to uptake nitrogen and whatever as well. All right. Now, both of these are measured from soil samples. There's an index system of 1 to 4. So 1 is very low levels of P or K. 2 is low levels of P and K. 3 is medium or maintenance levels of P and K. And 4 is where there's high levels of P and K. Look, you can just see both these are barley plants here, but it's the same for grass plants. It'd be the same for your silage fields. So these are both index 1 samples or index 1 soils, and when there was, no very low levels of P and K, and you can just see with applying no P or no K that the plants hardly grew at all. There's very poor development. Whereas if you put phosphorus along with the seed, or if you added more potassium as you go along here, you can just see how different the plants grow. All right. And as I said, that's the exact same for silage ground or whatever as well. So if you're horsing on nitrogen onto your silage fields and wondering why it's not growing because you're putting on loads of nitrogen, look, maybe it's your P's and K's need to be looked at. So that's why soil fertility is important. Where are we in the country at the minute? Like the P and K levels are only 20% of the soils. This from tens of thousands of soil samples has gone into Teagasc over the last few years. Only 20% of samples that are tested are fine for the acidic level. So they're fine for pH, they're fine for P, and they're fine for K. So 80% of all the samples that come in, whether that be grassland or tillage samples, are short of either lime or P or K. So look, it's important that you do tests. So what can you do to identify, what you need to do in your own farm? Look, it all starts, a lot of you have been through this before, it all starts with soil samples. Now is the ideal time of the year to take soil samples, by the way. If you haven't a slurry out to date or whatever, like it's a long time since slurry or fertilizer was put out, so land has got a good break. It's an ideal time to take soil samples. You should take a sample every 10 to 12 acres, all right? And it should be a representative soil sample. You needn't be coming into your advisor, your consultant with a bucket of soil that you dug up in the middle of the field. You have to take a sample like this W here. You have to go all across the field and take cores all across the field to get as representative sample as possible, all right? How much does it cost, right? Just say, look, it varies. It can be 15, 20, 25 euros, depending different places. You can get different prices, but just say it was 20 euros. So 10 acres, 20 euros, that's 2 euros per acre. The sample is valid for 4 years. So that's 50 cents per acre for 4 years. It's a very low cost. All right. So like, is your soil worth that to you or whatever to see what's going on in it and to take remedial action when necessary. So look, it's all very fine. Taking samples is very easy, but you need to act on the results. So look, next thing, you have to put a plan in place. You have your sample results. You need to do something about it. The first protocol is liming. All right. You have to lime, you have to apply, you have to correct the pH in your soil. It has to be, you have to get, if it's very acidic, you have to move it up in the scale up to over 6. First of all, before you start doing anything about rectifying the P and the K levels. There again, in your plan, you should target the P and K levels to match your stocking rate and your soil type. Look, if you're lowly stocked and you don't need much grass, well then, like, you don't have to be, fixing all your fields. But I would advise that, whatever, if most of you are making silage or whatever as well, you have to correct the pH and the PK levels in your silage fields if you're going to get good crops out of them. All right. I'll just mention soil type in the next slide. It's important also when we're talking about liming. So what is the ideal pH? Look, it all depends on your soil and on your crop. What I'm talking about in the next few slides here is going to be specifically about clay soils. Peat soils have to be treated differently. They don't have much minerals in them, so they can operate at a far lower pH. They can be far more acidic and still produce, good grass. But you shouldn't be putting much lime on them, and you shouldn't be putting much P and K in them. It's just little and off basis as far as peat goes. So I'm just going to focus on the clay soils. So, right, that's the soil type. Right, the next thing is the crop you grow. So the likes of potatoes or oats like a pH of about 6, so they like it kind of acidic. Potatoes don't like fresh lime. All right. Grassland should be up to about 6.3, and barley we're talking about up at maybe 6.5. So that's where your targets are. If you have potatoes in a rotation, and they don't like lime, wait till your potato crop has been harvested. Then you can apply to lime to that field, and it'll be at least 5 years before the potatoes back in it again. So that'll be fine. All right. Right, is it back to money again? Is it worth it? Look, lime. If you have acidic soil, it's between 5.5 and 6. For every euro you spend on ground lime and limestone, you're going to get €4 back in extra grass, or €6 back on extra grain and straw. Like, there's not many other farm inputs that's going to give you them sort of returns either. And why does this happen? Well, look, if your soil is acidic, it's because straight away, once you apply the lime, it raises the pH level, which releases nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that's locked up in the soil because it doesn't like acidic soil, so it stays locked up in the soil. Automatically, you're going to release some of that P's and K's. So like that's why you get an immediate kick from it. And also, any fertilizer you do apply, you're going to get more of an uptake because the pH has been risen. All right. So look, if you do nothing else, only apply lime to your land, you're going to get extra grass. So it's money well spent. All right. Uh, we get a lot of questions about this, about what type of limestone you could be applying. Should you be applying bagged lime or ground limestone? Look, it depends how acidic your soil is. If your soil is very acidic and you have to move it a good few points, look, ground limestone over here is your only economical option. All right. If you have to build it from say 5.5 to north of 6, it's your only economical option. Like, ground limestone or bag lime, granulated lime is a very good product, and it usually they say at a maintenance level it's 3 to 1. So if you have 3 tons of ground limestone to put out, you can put out 1 ton of bag lime in its place. But in a build-up situation, it's 1 for 1. So if you try to rise it too much with bag lime, you're talking about, it could be 6.5 times more expensive than using ground limestone. And even in a maintenance situation, just where you're just putting on a little bit to keep the levels high, it may be twice the expensive as ground limestone. It's a great product in some places where you can't travel with ground lime. It's a good job, but it's our quick fix. It is very good product. Uh, just like tips about applying ground lime, like split the application. If you have to put out say 4 tons of lime to the acre, if that's the recommendation back from your soil samples, you should apply 2 tons now this year, wait a couple of years and put out the other 2 tons. Like, you should never apply too much lime at the one time. Like, at the very max, if you have very dry ground, no more than 3 tons per acre in any single application, because if you do that, it'll lock up nutrients and cause more problems than you're trying to solve. High molybdenum, your soil samples will indicate whether your soils are in a high molybdenum area. If they are, high molybdenum is linked to copper deficiency. So you need to roll back a little bit on the lime you're applying to make sure you don't run into that problem. I said peaty soils earlier, like, you have to reduce the lime recommendation on those by 6 tons per acre, because they don't respond the same way to lime. And also, like, the P and K levels, you only give them a little and often basis, just to keep them ticking over. You don't give them heavy dressings. Other questions you get lots of times about slurry or urea and lime. Look, you always apply slurry or urea first, wait about 7 to 10 days, and then apply the ground limestone. If you apply the ground limestone first, you have to wait at least 3 to 6 months before you can apply slurry. So it's important to do it the right way around. Lime can be spread at any time of the year. All right, if the ground conditions are good enough, it can be put out. The only proviso I'd add into that is, if silage ground. If you're coming close up to cutting silage, or if there's a good lot of leaf in your silage fields, you don't need to be putting ground lime in it, because if that's still there come harvest time, come silage cutting time, though, it can have an effect on how the silage keeps. So maybe you're better off in that situation, silage fields, to wait till after the silage has been cut. The last thing I've up here is, look, drive slowly. All right. Most of those machines for putting out lime, they're belt driven off the wheels. So the faster you drive, the faster the line comes out. You need a good even application across your field. All right. You want to be liming your own fields. You don't need to be doing the neighbors as well. Right. Just how much PRK? This is just going to run quickly through a couple of slides here now. Just how much P and K, it's really just, at the very least, you have to replace what you've taken off. So look, I'll just show you an example here. this is the off takes from a cut of silage. So a cut of silage takes off 16 units of P and 100 units of K per acre. All right. So just to replace that, 3 bags of cut sward and 2,500 gallons of cattle slurry is 20 units of P and 110 units of K. So it's basically just about covering what you've taken off. But look, for silage, as we showed in the slide earlier about P, you need to be trying to get your indexes up to index 2 or 3 for silage ground. So in those situations, you need to add more P and K for a build up. You probably want 32 units of P and maybe up to 185 units of K to build up your P and K levels, especially in your silage ground. All right. Right, fertilizer prices. Don't be ringing me up now looking to buy fertilizer off me at these prices. I just want to show you something here. It's just fertilizer is very volatile market at the minute. So look, these are bulk prices for buying full loads. So like they're changing weekly at the minute. But the thing that doesn't change really is the thing down here at the bottom. So this is the value of the N, the P, and the K in all these different types of fertilizers. It's usually about about 1 to 2 to 1. So the phosphorus, the bit in the middle, is the expensive part of the fertilizer. So look, two things about it. Like if your lime isn't right, if you're in an acidic soil, if it's between 5.5 and 6, half of the fertilizer you put out here, half of the P fertilizer, it can't be taken up with the plant. It's locked up in the soil. So look, it's wasting your money. So there again, it's another reason why you should lime your ground and you have to correct that first before you start applying your P's and K's. The second thing is at these prices here, if you're trying to build up your P and K levels in your soil, at these prices here, you'd be out of house and home trying to do it with chemical fertilizers. So is there another option out there for you? Right, organic manures, when we're talking about organic manures, we're talking about pig slurry, cattle slurry, we're talking about hen dung, we're talking about farmyard manure, we're talking about spent mushroom compost, so all those sorts of materials. If you have low or very low PK levels, importing organic manures, look, it could be a viable option for your farm to improve soil fertility. Like it could take 5 to 10 years to rise the P level in your soil. So look, the sooner you start, the sooner you get going. I was talking to another advisor today. He said a farmer he was dealing with there maybe 5 years ago, all his soils were very low or low. They were index 1 or 2 for P and K, and he's been applying nothing, only pig slurry and nitrogen for the past 5 years, and all those soils are up at maintenance levels now. So look, it can be done, and it doesn't have to. There is cheap ways about doing it. All right. Just going to go on here, the value of organic manures. Look, going back to fertilizer prices again, like I just want to, the main point I want to get over here tonight is the manures and slurries, they're not waste products, all right? They're valuable sources of N, P, and K, particularly if they're applied at the right time of the year, like March, April, or May, or whatever, rather than like the beginning of February when it was cold and wet and plants were, grass wasn't growing, or next September, October, just before closing of deadlines. If they're put out at the right time, they're a very valuable product. Like 1,000 gallons of pig slurry is the same as 1 bag of 19,720, which is worth about 27 euros per 1,000 gallons at current fertilizer prices. Cattle slurry is a little bit higher in K and a little bit lower in P. It's probably worth about 22, 23 euros per 1,000 gallons. Farmyard manure is worth about 9 euros per tonne. Spent mushroom compost about 12 euros per tonne. Poultry manures are very high in P and K. They can be worth from anything from 20 to 60 euros per tonne compared to fertilizer prices. Just the only proviso I'll have in there is broiler manure. You have to make sure where it's coming from. Broiler manure, like could have, because the nature of it, there could be dead chickens in it or whatever as well. Don't spread broiler manure on grassland areas because there could be an issue with botulism. All right. There again, coming back to all these manures, it's possible to get them tested. You could test them for the NP and K levels before they come in, and then you can balance them up with bag fertilizer or whatever as well. When it comes to organic manures, the main thing is the cost of transport and the spreading costs. Like if you're very far from a supplier and the cost of getting it to your farm, like might make it prohibitive, but it's definitely something you should be looking into. This is going slightly sideways, but it isn't. Greenhouse gases. Look, given the climate change and greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, like in the very near future, we could be facing 20% reduction in nitrogen fertilizer limits on farms. So the efficiency of nitrogen use on our farms and soil fertility is probably more important than ever. All right. And I mentioned earlier protected urea, and you'll hear a lot about it. And I just want to explain what it is. Protected urea is just it's the same as it's ordinary urea, but it's got a coat around it which protects it and stops it being lost to the atmosphere. All right. Can fertilizers can be, you can lose some of the nitrogen when it's very wet. Ordinary standard urea, you can, when it's very sunny and dry weather, you can lose it to the atmosphere. So protected urea works well in both of those scenarios. All right. So just look, liming and protected urea are two of the major ways in which you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from your farm. All right. So it's you'll hear a lot more about it in the future. And it's just, that's why I just want to mention it here. So seeing as I'd already mentioned liming, just when it comes back to protected urea for a unit of nitrogen, you can see protected urea is 87 cent, whereas standard urea is 78 and CAN is 93. So it's roughly about the same price as CAN. So look, it costs roughly the same as CAN and ordinary urea. And at the same time, it produces the same amount of grass, and it also reduces greenhouse gas emissions, which, look, we all have a responsibility to try and reduce. Right, quick take-home messages. I just want to finish up very quickly here. Look, take-home messages. Take soil samples. All right, they're not expensive. We're talking about 50 cent per acre. It's not a big investment, and so I would advise you strongly to do it. And there again, there's not much point doing it if you're not going to act on the results. So put a plan in place once you have your soil sample results. A lot of you are in GLOS, so you would have fertilizer plans drawn up already. So it's only a matter of updating them with any new samples if needed. Look, lime. It's the first thing you have to do. All right, it's the most important thing you have to do. Just be careful, as I said, with peat soils. They can't be treated the same way as clay mineral soils. And then if you have high molybdenum in your area, you have to watch that too, to avoid copper deficiency. And then another very important fact, look, how far do you go? Correct the P&K to meet your demand. If you're lowly stocked, you don't have to have every field up to the maintenance levels, up to index 3. But like, I'd strongly advise that your silage fields should be up to that level. Look, main thing I want to talk about, look, don't waste organic manures, all right? This soil temperatures here, I took this soil temperature 11 o'clock today, all right? It was 4.8 degrees. Grass only starts growing at 6 degrees, all right? So the grass is not growing at the minute today, all right? If I dropped that 2 pallets 18612 into your yard this morning, would you be putting it out today? The answer is no, all right? So like, it's the same with organic manures. They're not waste, so don't waste them, all right? Apply them when the grass is growing, and look up where we are along the western seaboard. You'll be talking about into March or whatever, unless things change very quickly in the next week or so. Last couple of things, just protected urea. I've explained what it is. You're going to hear a lot more about it. Look, there's no disadvantage to it. It grows the same amount of grass as ordinary urea and CAN, and it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Talk to your advisor or consultant about, update your plans or whatever. If there's no point going to your advisor or consultant later this year to talk to them about how much slurry you took in for the year. Plan all that now, because for whatever slurry you take in now, you have to reduce your P&K fertilizer imports at the same time, or your purchases. Just two really quick things about, I said I wasn't going to mention regulations, but it's just important. If you don't have up-to-date soil samples, the department assumes that you have index 3, that you have maintenance levels for your P&K on your soils. So if you had an inspection, and if you have been feeding a lot of meal which has P in it, or if you spread a lot of 18612, you're probably up at your limits already. Never mind if you imported any slurry as well. So look, there again, another reason to take soil samples. And a lot of you might have been in GLOS 1 or 2 recently and roll over your contract into 2021. You might have taken soil samples in 2015, and those samples are now out of date. All right, so you'll be back to index 3 for your whole farm unless you get new samples. So look, contact your planner about that just to see how you're fixed. Look, I just want to finish off very quickly on this. Good soil fertility. It's good for your soil. It's good for your pocket. It's good for the environment, and it's something that's totally under your control. And look, later on, if we have time, any questions and opinions are welcome, because I'm sure you didn't agree with everything I said. So questions are more than welcome. Thanks for that, Keane.
That's great. Thanks, Martin. If you want to just stop sharing your screen there, Martin. Yeah, you can. And just I'll remind those of you that have attended this evening's session again is that you can send in your questions and comments. I see a few coming in already. Right throughout this evening's session. I'm sure there'll be a few on what Martin was going over there and what Fergus is going to cover over the next short while. And I'll put them to the panel before the end. So Fergus, can you hear me there?
Yeah, I can hear you, Cian.
Yeah, perfect. So you can go ahead there, Fergus. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Cian. So look at good evening, folks. As Cian said at the outset there, Fergus O'Rourke is my name. I'm an education officer based in the Manor Hamilton office. And I suppose we heard there from Martin, who was, working very much underground. I'm going to be focusing above the ground in terms of spring grass. So I suppose just at the outset, I want to acknowledge that over the last wee while, weather has been quite difficult. But nevertheless, we are going to have to get ready for spring grazing as soon as we're able to get going with it. So look, we'll plough straight into it. Just a wee outline of the presentation there. I'm going to focus a wee bit on the value of grass, maybe some of the challenges and opportunities this spring. I suppose a wee bit then on potential savings that can be achieved with earlier turnout of stock, factors influencing the supply of grass on farms. I look a wee bit at grazing infrastructure along with grass technology, and then finally a few key take-home messages. So look at why grass. We hear about it very regular that it's Ireland's competitive advantage in terms of producing lamb, beef, milk, whatever you might be into. So I suppose, why is it important to us and why should we maximize it in the diets of our stock? So, straight up there, it significantly lowers our feed costs. And I suppose there's just a wee point on the cost of grass itself. It's working out at about 7 cents a kilo, so it's pretty cheap when you compare it to something like grass silage or indeed meal. If we take meal at an average price of 280 a ton, you can see that meal is almost 4 times more expensive than grass. So straight away you can see how important it is to try and maximize the amount of it in your diets of the stock. I suppose another couple of benefits there is it'll reduce your housing period if we can get longer at grass. And I suppose there's obviously, along with a cost saving, there's a labour saving there as well. And I suppose that follows through when we're dealing with slurry, less time and cost associated with slurry storage and the handling of it itself. And I suppose we're in a decade where emissions is going to play a big role. And I suppose the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia emissions from agriculture in particular is going to be a big area over the next number of years. So certainly by grazing cattle a wee bit longer in the year, that will have a positive impact on those as well. So I suppose we all like talking about money. So, to put a bit of value on what grass is worth to us, if we take, for example, on our dry stock farms there, it has been proven that every extra ton of grass eaten will increase profit by approximately €105. And then for any of our dairy farmers that are on the call then as well, every extra ton of grass eaten has been shown to increase profit by approximately €181 per hectare. So it is a pretty valuable commodity that we have on the farm. So look at spring grazing 2021. It's always good to start with a positive. So I focus on the opportunities first, maybe. There's an opportunity there for profitable live weight gain. As you've seen earlier, it's significantly cheaper than any other feedstuffs that we have on the farm, and it's something that we can grow ourselves. I think most of you would agree that animals are healthier outdoors. It goes without saying. So that's obviously a big opportunity for us. And I suppose on some farms, there probably is a relatively good grass supply, given how difficult weather conditions were last autumn. On many farms, stock were actually turned in a little bit earlier than normally would be the case. And then I suppose finally, while a lot of farmers are, quite good at actually growing grass, I suppose where a lot of us might fall down is maybe using the grass or getting the maximum use out of it. So there's an opportunity there for some of us maybe to try and make better use of the grass that we're growing already. But I suppose along with opportunities, there's also a number of challenges. Some of them perceived, maybe, if we think about mindset, maybe, sometimes we can often think that we should have cattle out by a certain date, or indeed we should only put out cattle when we've run out of feed in the yard or something like that. So maybe a little bit of a change in mindset and trying to get our cattle and sheep out a little bit earlier might be something to consider. I suppose maybe there's a perceived increased workload, with spring grazing. There probably is a little bit more work in terms of fence and strip grazing and things like that, but it's not in vain. It's all worthwhile. And then I suppose a challenge, look at on particularly dry stock farms, profitability is medium to low in some cases, so that can often be a challenge in changing our ways sometimes. So just a wee point there, each day at grass has been proven to be worth approximately €2 per livestock unit, and that's made up of cost savings there in terms of getting stock out to grass. So, it's grand talking about getting cattle out early, but is it really worth it? And I suppose, how much is it worth? I just have a very simple example here, 30 suckler cows, for example, 30 livestock units. As I said previously, day at grass is worth about €2 of a cost saving. Very simply there, if we could get our cattle out 2 weeks earlier than normal, so whatever your turnout date is normally tends to be the case, if we could actually pull it back a week or 2 weeks in this case, you can see that it leads to quite a significant saving in terms of our feed costs and other associated costs. So look at factors affecting spring grass supply. At the end of the day, we can only control what goes on inside our own farm gate. And I just have a few points here that farmers that maybe we can exercise control over. So, for example, our autumn closing date there, that's obviously within the farmer's remit in terms of when he or she closes up the paddocks for the winter. Winter grass growth rate there, to a certain extent, it will be influenced by the weather conditions, but likewise the farmer will also play a role in that as well. Spring nitrogen application, it'll be the farmer sitting on the tractor, so it's very much within the farmer's control there on that one. Spring grazing management, likewise how we set up the farm, how we set up the paddocks for grazing, that's under the farmer's remit as well. And then I suppose finally there on spring grass growth, that's kind of a 50-50 thing. We see, we're obviously well aware of the weather at the moment, but there is a certain amount of control that the farmer has over that. And I suppose it links back to all the previous factors in terms of closing up our paddocks and fertilizer application. And I suppose just to put all of that into a practical sense, if we take the example of a lactating ewe, an early lactating ewe has approximately twice the feed requirements of an early to mid-pregnancy ewe. So, what that's kind of telling us is that having grass in the month of March is probably much more beneficial than leaving the ewes to shave off pasture ground in the autumn time of the year, because the ewe is a greater demand when she's suckling her lambs. So here's just another practical point. This was proven here a number of years ago, where every 1 week delay closing the farm after the 10th of October reduces spring grass supply by 100 kilos per hectare. And I suppose just to put that into animals, that's probably it's the equivalent of a week's feeding for 6 ewes, or alternatively that amount of grass, 100 kilos, it'd feed 42 ewes for a day. So it's just to put it maybe in terms of what it's actually worth to us. If we can try and close up a proportion of the farm that bit earlier, it will be of significant benefit come springtime. So look at spring fertilizer there. I'm not going to rehash what Martin told us a wee bit earlier, but it's something that we need to consider. And I suppose the average response rate, if we take, for example, a kilo of nitrogen, you could reasonably expect 10 kilos of grass to be returned for that 1 kilo of nitrogen that you spread. So there is a fairly good return on investment there. Likewise with fertilizer types, protected urea is the product that we probably will be recommending. It's a very stable product in wetter conditions, and it's also possibly less likely to leach. But irrespective of any fertilizer product, urea or not, we need to be spreading fertilizer in suitable conditions, as Martin outlined earlier. And then I suppose finally, in terms of slurry, it's if we can at all possible, try to get as much of our slurry out earlier in the year. So ideally in the springtime. It has been proven there that there is a much better response and a much better uptake of the slurry by doing that, as opposed to waiting later in the year. So look at getting stock out there. Obviously priority stock is what we would like to get out, but ground conditions will dictate how we go on that one. But certainly lighter animals are easiest to turn out first. And I suppose in a way that will also help to build our confidence that if we put lighter animals out and we're fit to get away with those, it might encourage us maybe to build on that and let out slightly heavier stock. Very simple point there. We're going to be grazing the drier parts of the farm. There's nothing too complicated about that. And similarly with the next point here, lower covers will be easier to deal with and easier to graze out in wet weather. Some people will practice on-off grazing, where stock are grazed for a couple of hours during the day. Probably more commonplace on the dairy side of things, but there are some beef farmers doing it as well. I suppose key to making that work for you is grazing infrastructure, and I suppose time. You probably need a little bit more time and need to be around home a little bit more to practice that, but it can be done on dry stock farms. And then I suppose look at the final point. If animals are very unsettled, don't be afraid to rehouse them. Like if it's a case you got cattle out for a week, well then it's a week extra at grass. It's a reduction in costs, and then I suppose in a way you're probably acclimatizing the cattle for when they will actually be turned out full time. So look I've outlined there the benefits on our pocket and indeed the animals themselves. Early grazing also has a positive effect on the sward itself. And I suppose I just have two wee pictures here. The picture on the left shows a sward pasture that was grazed 2-3 weeks earlier than the sward on the right hand side. So on the left you can see that the plant is very much tillering. It's a nice green color. It's actively growing. Whereas the sward on the right hand side, the cattle in that case didn't get out on time. And what happened was that when they did get out, they went out on very heavy covers of grass. They were unable to graze them out completely or to the sufficient level. And unfortunately, we were left with this sort of a dead butty, a stemmy sort of a material, which is quite poor in feed value and will probably lead to you subsequently having to top off that maybe later in the summer. So early grazing also has a positive effect on the grass sward for the duration of the grazing season if we can get out that bit earlier. So look at infrastructure, the road to success. Every farm needs to have a certain degree of infrastructure. It'll be dictated on I suppose, the intensity of the farming system and the stocking rate, but there are some common things that we need to consider. So look at the positives here of a paddock system. They'll allow for greater grazing management control. They'll also ensure higher grass production. which in turn will help grass quality. Infrastructure will allow greater access in wet weather, and I suppose it will also make grass budgeting that bit easier, and also grass measuring as well. Paddock design, something we often get asked here as advisors, you know, how big should my paddock be? And again, I just have two very simple examples here. 40 suckler cows and 40 weanlings, you're looking at a 2-hectare paddock. Likewise, someone with 100 ewes, you're looking at a 2-hectare paddock, and you're looking at about 7 to 8 paddocks per grazing group. Where am I pulling all of those figures out of? So we kind of work off the thinking that we would like to grow grass in 3 weeks, and we would like to graze it out in 3 days. So essentially working back from that, we can, to a degree, we can design the paddock size depending on the amount of cattle and sheep that we have. The paddock ratio of 2 to 1, what I mean there is that ideally the paddock should be twice as long as it's wide. If the paddock is very long and narrow, it might lead to issues with animals galloping in very wet weather, and it might be a bit more difficult to manage, but obviously your farm and field size will dictate that. And look, a flexible approach is required. Oftentimes what we see is farmers who are adopting a paddock system, they will divide up their fields with temporary fence, and a cheap and cheerful option. And when they feel quite comfortable with that, then in some cases they'll actually go in and put in permanent fencing. So it's a trial and error process to a certain extent. These are just, look, very briefly, some of the different paddock designs that we can have on the farm. Critical to all of those is the location of the water trough, you know, and if the water trough needs to be located in such a case that it allows for the splitting up of various fields. And then just finally, a number of different options. If you're, you know, very elaborate, you go with your sheep wire and thorny wire. If you're just maybe adult grazing livestock, a row of electric wire there will be sufficient to graze them, divide them rather. So look at grazing infrastructure. Does it pay? You know, any investment that we make on the farm, there has to be a return on our investment in order for it to be worthwhile. And you can see here quite clearly that investing in grazing infrastructure, there is a significant return on investment for investing in things like fencing and water. So it is well worth doing. These are a number of technologies that we have here in Teagasc to help you with your grazing and grassland management. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I suppose it's just to alert you that these systems and solutions exist. But I suppose the most important thing that anyone can do on their own farm is to get out and walk the farm fairly regular, get a feel for, you know, how much grass is on the farm. And I suppose you'll be able to make a decision then in conjunction with the use of these various technologies. So look at a few take-home messages there. Grass is the cheapest feed, you know, that we have. It's something that grows out of the ground. We don't have to import it. So it is by far the cheapest feed that we can produce. And it's all about keeping our costs low. It can support high levels of animal performance. You know, in some cases, it might even support higher levels of animal performance if it's managed correctly than other feed sources. There is a lot of technology available there for farmers. So, you know, I'd encourage you to speak with your advisor or consultant. We're available to help on that front. And then I suppose, look, just to finish up, be flexible, you know, give it a go and keep it simple. So I'll conclude with that. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll hand you back to Cian, who'll facilitate the question and answer session.
That's great. Thanks, Fergus. I'll just switch us back here now. And Martin, if you want to come back on screen there, thanks very much. Oh, hold on a second. Sorry, I noticed I'm not actually on screen. Yeah, so look, a good few questions have come in over the last, whatever it is, 3/4 of an hour or so. I know, Martin, you've tackled one or two. So maybe Maybe we'll start with one that's straightforward. A lot of people are looking at getting out fertilizer, and I know you mentioned the soil temperature, but there was a question there about at what rate people should go out at the moment. So people are considering go out with some urea at the moment. What rate would you suggest to go out with over the next week or so?
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's clear now.
Yeah, no, so we'd be talking about the same as maybe a half bag urea to the acre. So we're talking about 23 units per acre. Preferably protected urea if you can get hold of it or whatever. But look, if it's standard urea either, like, it's probably the best. You don't, like, you're just looking for enough there to get the grass growing, get it started.
Yeah, that's perfect. And another one there, just a simple enough one there on whether or not you can take your own soil samples. I know people are in Glas at the moment, and then can you get a nutrient management plan done by, the question directed at us at Teagasc.
Yeah.
And the cost is also involved in it, but that's a kind of a movable feast. But if you want to comment on that, Martin, as well, please.
Yeah, the samples, yeah, got no issue taking your own samples. But the only thing I would say, maybe I didn't stress it at the time, is I mentioned there, don't go out with a spade and just dig a couple of holes in the field or whatever, and then carry that in for soil sample. It needs to be a representative sample across the field, and we're looking for the sample from that, top 7, 8, 10 centimeters. So that's why you use those samplers. All right. But it'll usually, depending where you're based, like, you can get a sampler from your local co-op maybe and take your own samples. There's absolutely no issue with it. And there'll be no issue getting a nutrient management plan drawn up. I'm stumped now at it. I'm not sure how much the cost, maybe, but you can just contact a local advisor about that.
That's great. Thanks, Martin. Maybe one or two then, Fergus, just aimed probably at yourself there. A question on Magic Day. This is a term you hear bandied around. You get it in the media a good bit, and I know that it will be used very commonly through our own output. As what exactly is Magic Day?
Yeah, a good question. So look, essentially what Magic Day is when the average grass growth equals the demand on the farm. So obviously that will differ on various farms, but it's a straight link between the grass growth and the demand that's currently on the farm.
Okay. During your presentation, Martin, a lot of questions. Obviously, it seems to be in recent years there's been a huge upsurge in the or maybe the perception. People are really noticing how important lime is. So lots of questions come in on lime. The first was how long does granular lime last? So what is the effective term of that of lime, or that granular lime once it's spread?
Yeah, well, look, the way it's formulated, it does react quickly in the soil. It does react quickly, and is available, does improve the situation fairly quickly. But the trouble is, it doesn't last. You have to apply it every year. So whereas if you have to apply, say, 3 tons to the acre of ground limestone, then you only have to put out a ton of granular lime if it's at maintenance level. But that has to be spread out over the 5 years. You have to apply it every year, so it doesn't last as long. Just the thing about ground lime as well, say, like, there's about a third of ground lime is really, like, it's about 100, 150 microns. It's tiny stuff. It's very dusty stuff that will work its way fast into the ground. So if you're putting out 3 tons to the acre, there's a ton of that will work its way into the ground very fast, and then the other couple of tons will work. Like, that's why you'd wait another couple of years before you'd put out the next application. But I'm not trying to be down on granulated lime. It's an excellent product, and it's very handy. It can be looking spread with a fertilizer spread on the back of a quad. But it is a more expensive product, and if you have to move a long way with your pH, it is quite expensive.
So yeah, that kind of covers it. But just to re-emphasize, there's a question there: how long does it take for granulated lime to take effect? So I know you said about the thing,
putting it out every year. I
low granules, yeah.
Yeah, like, I'm not 100% sure, but I think if you put out a couple of bags to the acre, like, it will move a point or point whatever. It'll go from 5.8 to 5.9, fairly quickly. It's a bit like granulated fertilizers. It's the same sort of reaction times.
Yeah. So it performs much the same as the bagged fertilizer. Let me see, Fergus. Then a question then about what's your view on cleaning off land with sheep over the winter months, and whether or not there are advantages. Maybe you'd give us your opinion on that, please.
Yeah, another good question, and it's something that occurs a lot with in the general area. It certainly has its merits, I suppose, particularly for silage ground. We know that it's a very important building block when we're growing a good quality crop of silage, that we have a clean sward to build with, that there's no, I suppose, dead grass on it from the previous winter. I suppose, moderation is maybe key in a sense, in that you don't want your whole farm shaved off over the winter, because there is no doubt about it, it is going to impact on the subsequent spring's grass growth. And I suppose there's an old saying there, it takes grass to grow grass. And if it's a case that there's no grass on the farm in the spring because it was hoovered off with sheep, there's no two ways about it. It is going to be that bit slower for it to return. And I suppose particularly when we're spreading fertilizer, that saying is very apt, that we need to be spreading our fertilizers in areas where there is a wee cover of grass already, because it will be much slower to perform if you're spreading it on bare ground. And I suppose, not to take Martin's thunder on that, if you're very bare ground, you probably should be targeting your slurry to that side of things.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much. Martin, just another question there, and it's specifically aimed at whether or not you need to leave a gap between spreading lime and urea. Now, I don't know if you want to comment on spreading slurry and lime as well, or urea generally, but the question was aimed asking, is there a need to leave a gap between spreading lime and protected urea as opposed to standard urea?
Yeah, as well, the research says that the protected urea works most the same as can. So that the coat that I explained earlier, the surrounding urea, protects it being, the reaction when lime, there's a spike of lime around an ordinary urea granule, but it's protected from that when it's, oh God, hold on a second. Right, no, go back. The protected urea works just the same as can, so there's not the issue with it as there is with ordinary standard urea. So if you spread lime, you can spread. Sorry, I'm getting muddled up myself now. If you spread lime, there is no interaction with protected urea. It's the same as can. It's different from standard urea. Sorry, I got muddled myself there at the minute.
Yeah, that's no problem. And then just back from that, maybe the interaction between slurry as well. Whether or not if somebody wants to go out now, they've got dry ground and they're considering going out. You see the importance of lime this year, and they want to go out with lime, but they also considering spreading slurry. Is what way
go with the slurry first. With slurry or ordinary urea, go out with that now and wait 7 to 10 days and then put out your lime. All right. And then there's no issue with can or with protected urea if you go the other way around. But with slurry and ordinary standard urea, you have to apply them first, wait 7 or 10 days, and then you can apply your lime.
Okay, that's great. Thanks a million, Martin. Yeah. Fergus, another couple of questions for you there. A query there on how effective a back fence is when you're strip grazing, when considering grass growth on, it says on average paddock sizes, but maybe you want to comment on the usefulness of a back fence.
Yeah. So, look at the key concept of rotation and grazing, and be it paddock or strip grazing, the key concept with it all is about protecting the regrowth of the grass, as opposed to set stock and where they're roaming a large area. By using the back fence, we're very much, helping to protect the regrowth of grass. But I suppose, oftentimes maybe in very wet or difficult conditions, there might be some level of poaching along the fence line. But broadly speaking, if we're able to graze an area and keep moving on, it will have a significant effect on protecting the grass regrowths for us. So it's something definitely that should be considered.
Yep, perfect.
Sorry, paddock size, if you're operating very, large paddocks, you probably will have to use maybe a back fence or strip wires that wee bit more. But if your paddock sizes are of of an appropriate size, you may not need to use them quite as much. You might be able to get in, graze them out, and get out quite quickly. Like.
Yeah, that's perfect, Fergus. Just a couple of more now. I can see the time is approaching 9. There was a question come in specifically, Martin, on DAP, so diammonium phosphate. I know it's used in places. Certainly, you'd pick it up in parts in the northwest here, but it was specific to peat soils and when it should be spread. Maybe you might comment on the use of DAP is the question, but high phosphorus fertilizers on peat soils.
I think isn't it 1820? I think DAP is. It's very it's something that it's very high in P. Look, just going back to earlier with peat soils. Peat soils, should only be treated like if they were at maintenance level, so they should get little and often. And to be honest with you, DAP would just have too much in it. You'd probably, it just wouldn't be taken up in time. You'd be losing a lot of it. You're better off go with a different product. All right, I'd say it's just too high for the little and often principle.
Yep, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah, peat soils are a little bit different. And Fergus, just one last one there to finish up is there's a query there about, you mentioned grazing lighter covers first, and a query then, you sometimes hear, particularly we get an easterly wind, or that you might have an issue with losing some of the benefit, that the covers might melt away a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Look at, I suppose I said it in the context of spring grazing, and maybe in difficult weather conditions. Yes, ultimately you would like to be grazing off the heavier covers that bit quicker, and as I said during the slides there, by getting our swards grazed off that bit earlier, and I suppose in particular the heavier covers, you're getting rid of that dead material, and then I suppose you're also stimulating the plant to tiller and to grow as well by grazing it. But I suppose I made that comment in the context of wet conditions, that if you want to get part of the farm grazed, you probably might have to go in on lighter covers to get through them. But it is a good point. Ideally, we should be getting in on heavier covers to get them grazed off ASAP.
Yeah, that's great clarification. Thanks a million, Fergus. Okay, I think, look, we're after 9 now at this stage, so I think we'll bring it to a close. That's it for this evening. I think there's been some very useful information there, certainly this time of year when we're looking to try and get animals out and to try and make the most of the grassland, and certainly the points about firstly trying to maximize the growth of grass or other crops on your farm this year, maximizing soil fertility, and then Fergus's presentation moving on then to try and utilize the grass and use the tools and the various different practical measures that you can to try and do that. This presentation, this webinar, along with all of the others, will be made available over the coming days on our YouTube channel, on our regional YouTube channel. This should be up by Thursday. All the other ones are already there. Next week's webinar is on cattle breeding and planning your next steps, and you can find full details of this by following Teagasc SLD, Sligo Leitrim Donegal, on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Thanks to Martin and Fergus for this evening. That's it. And remember, despite the current restrictions, you can always contact your Teagasc advisor on phone, text and email. Thank you very much for joining us. Stay safe and good night.
Thank you.